Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the impact of COVID on TAFEs from a national and international perspective. And it's great to have you with us. We would like to start by acknowledgement to country. We're obviously in various locations around Australia, and in those locations we pay, in the spirit of reconciliation, TDA acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land in which each of us is meeting. In our case here in Canberra, it's the Ngunnawal people. My name is Craig Robertson. I'm the CEO of TAFE Directors Australia, and it's fantastic to see all of you come online, dedicate this time at the end of what has been quite an amazing year. But nevertheless, it's a year that we expect will lead to major transformation going forward in the way that we organise and deliver vocational education and training in particular. This is a co-hosted event with one of our long-term corporate partners, Technology One. And we have online Peter Nicolaitis, who's the Industry Director of Education, and Matt Arnott, who's the Sales Director of Education. You'll be able to see them on the screen, and we'll be hearing from them later on. What we will be doing, though, is providing some high-level summary of a publication which we plan to release on Monday about the TAFE response to COVID. And this has been the basis of a survey that we've conducted of all TAFEs. When we talk about TAFEs, of course, we're talking about standalone TAFEs, but also the formal TAFE divisions of dual sector universities. We've also got a number of TAFE CEOs and TAFE staff who have joined us for today's presentation. We thank them for doing that, and we'll have a chance for some conversations later on. I would also like to be able to say congratulations to Grant Dreyer, who is online, who was announced yesterday will be the new CEO of TAFE from next year. So congratulations, Grant. Exciting news for everyone, except of course I presume Victoria University. Anyway, that's fantastic news for everyone. So on that note, I would like to be able to start with giving you an overview of the TAFE response to COVID. There we go. This will be a story that will be released on Monday. Essentially, what happened during 2020, particularly around February and March, as the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic were becoming more pronounced across Australia, and social isolation and forced shutdowns were put in place in all states and territories, essentially most TAFEs went to their term break early, essentially the Easter break early, and then went through major transformation to be able to make sure that vocational education and training, essentially all their programs, could be delivered to students into the home. We then conducted a survey of TAFEs roughly in June, July, about what was their experience. And this represents headline results from that feedback. I should outline, of course, that if you're expecting to see confidence intervals about responses, it wasn't that sort of survey. It was a survey of the different ways that TAFEs responded, and we are presenting here really headlines, narratives out of the story of the TAFE transformation. So let's start having a look at some of those figures. So essentially the move was structured and rapid. When we talk to some of our policy networks, which we run several in TAFE, we talk to members of our quality, compliance and regulation committee, who were essentially the people tasked with how do we essentially convert campus-based delivery and workshops into a connected form or digital in some particular way. Some of those TAFEs really categorised their programs into 4 categories. Large part of the program was digital already. Some was suited to be converted to digital. Some would have been quite challenging to do, and some was limited. In the main, the theme that came back is that digital limited was primarily the trade training areas, where really you're coming and really off the job, you're acquiring a whole pile of new skills. And the graph, so that represents, the graph on the left represents amount of each course that roughly fits into those 4 categories. And then the graph on the right is the amount of each course type moved to digital. And again, digital already was able to move quite readily. Digital suited was able to move as well. The surprising result out of this, in fact, is the digital challenging actually converted quite a lot. And the feedback we've received through the survey is the teaching staff, having seen what was going on around the institute, said, I reckon we could give that a go as well. And so they worked really hard and innovatively to convert their programs that people thought maybe not, were maybe not able to be converted. They were able to do that as well. And digital limited, of course, there wasn't much conversion. However, that may well just have been because a lot of these categories were formed to sort of really schedule the work. And digital limited possibly could have converted, but because they are potentially at the end of the queue, that tended to be the result there. So here is the proportion of each course type moved to digital. And so you can see those results there. And the days that it took to do that conversion. And you can see that essentially within 20 to 25 days, the extent of courses that could move to digital delivery were able to be done. Now, I do need to caution here that that doesn't mean the full component of the qualification or the course delivery was converted to digital. We know at this particular point in time, particularly with social distancing and some businesses still remaining closed or certainly limiting who can come onto their site, that either work placements or conducting skill-based assessments and practices in a COVID-safe way means that some courses remain incomplete. The way to think about these graphs is that what could be converted to digital delivery was done, and it was done essentially in a maximum of 25 days. Then we looked across and got feedback from what were the challenging aspects of the conversion to digital. Was it in fact the readiness of the student cohort, the teacher readiness, the amount of knowledge-based theoretical learning required, or the amount of workshop, simulated, practice-based assessment sessions? And of course, what you can see is it's really the amount of workshop, simulated, practical assessments that's the limiting factor. When we come to the issues of readiness of the student cohort or the teacher readiness, the general feedback through our survey was that that was not a huge limiting factor. It was a factor, but it wasn't a determining factor in limiting capacity to convert. In other words, the results are showing that students, obviously acknowledging the particular circumstances that TAFEs are in and what they're in, were accepting of digital delivery. And what it does also show is that teachers right across the board lifted to the challenge and worked rapidly to convert their courses to digital delivery. Key to this was the new range or array or new priorities given to student support services. And what you can see there in terms of the feedback and the strength of the feedback is clearly, as you'd expect for a lot of students who haven't done online learning before, ICT support, potentially including loans of equipment, etc., was the key support required. But the one-on-one support to the student that was able to be delivered virtually, possibly in a more structured and targeted way, what was beneficial. And then, of course, because TAFEs did a lot of pulse surveys of their students, they were also able to see whether there were students that were struggling with mental health and wellbeing. And so they were quickly able to target that support, whether it was on the phone, video conferencing, or the like. So out of this, even though you might think an on-campus experience in a class offers, is the premium in terms of offering support and encouragement to a student, a lot of the feedback from TAFEs is that teachers were finding doing it virtually, one-on-one, at a different timeline that possibly suited the student was a very powerful source of having this new connection with students. So what that means in terms of ongoing educational support and wellbeing support will be interesting as we look forward. Then, of course, at the beginning of the economic upheaval, when businesses were forced to close, many states offered free online courses to citizens. And we've collated that information to the best extent that we can. And there's roughly about 248, 250 free online courses. And what you can see on the left there is they were mainly short courses, skill sets, or micro-credentials, as you would expect. And there were some full qualifications that were also on offer. Then you can see on the right, there are essentially the areas in which the training was taken up. Some of this was around, you could possibly split into 3 to 4 elements of what was the reason for take-up. For those doing online who are possibly at home, having sort of been laid off from work, we're probably picking up elements to pick up their capabilities for the workplace. And so you can see there items like digital literacy, project administration, accounting and bookkeeping were those sorts of things that people picked up. There were other things that were needed because of the pandemic. We know that there was a real focus on safe food handling, infection control, etc., as well as there was new services around telehealth. So you could see that people were coming through and doing that. And then there were people who were probably saying, I'm wanting to try to reposition myself in the sort of the looking forward. And so you can see the big qualifications there, or what we would view as the big qualifications: nursing, early childhood, ICT, community services, allied health, building and construction. So quite an interesting mix. And as at June 2020, there was 190,000 enrolments across Australia. So that was quite a big uptake. Then we asked TAFEs, what were they seeing as the benefit of this transition in terms of having to move to digital delivery? Yes, please. And what you can see here is the nature of the response. Front and centre there is to the improve and centralise resources. Most feedback from TAFEs were, because they had to do things rapidly and convert it in some form of digital learning objects, they sort of went through the institute and picked up what were the best of resources, and they used best of breed in terms of pushing that online. And so in some ways, they're all coming back and saying, actually, we've had a general uplift in our course content. Everybody else is also saying that all staff, even many staff, surprised themselves in terms of how quickly they converted to digital delivery. So there's been this improved staff capability, and also the notion of this student engagement in a connected way. And the message really is flexibility in terms of how they have been able to respond. So right across the board, the feedback has been very strong from staff to say, sure, it was a time of upheaval, but everybody sort of put their shoulder to the wheel, and we have seen a general uplift in our capabilities and service offer out of TAFEs. The big question for us now is, do we just expect to snap back to how it was beforehand? And the message from most TAFEs is no. A, we can't afford to do that in terms of what the economy and students require, but why would we in any case? So what are the lessons that are being drawn from this? And these are top line lessons at the moment. There'll be more when we release the publication. The first was the adaptation was quick, but it wasn't complete, of course, because we were not able to convert all courses to online. And we all accept that. The teacher capabilities for digital delivery has been lifted almost universally across institutes. Supported, of course, by big waves of professional development and the like, but nevertheless, I think there is a sense amongst teachers that actually this wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And maybe plans that were in place in TAFEs to say, well, over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to build our digital transformation. It was forced potentially in a 2 or 3 week period. Free online has opened up TAFE options for citizens. So possibly citizens who are at home, who were not able to go out, et cetera, said, well, I'll give this a go. So they've been introduced to the sort of course offerings at TAFEs. How we then leverage that for the future will be interesting. The feedback from students almost universally has been they've come to TAFE because they know they're going to be able to go get that real genuine skill acquisition with experienced practitioners in state-of-the-art facilities. So that's why, and they really do want to come back to campus for learning. But they've now got a taste for a different way of being able to engage and complete some of their work. So what we expect to have happen is there'll be students when we come back to campus, and some of course are doing that already, but they'll be wanting to be able to have some flexible delivery in terms of access to content, support from teachers and the like. Workforce training in a similar way has also moved to digital. And so whether we could think about B2B programs have been able to do in a different way. And I think really what's going to happen in the future is blended courses, and blended delivery is the way of the future. And that may well be a combination of industry competencies, but other learning outcomes that are outside of competencies. Then the question becomes whether that's accredited or non-accredited. But you can see now that a large part of citizens in this country and students have seen a new model, and they will be looking for, well, maybe this is how I want to engage in my vocational education and training journey. I should mention in finishing that this applied equally to international students who found themselves in a difficult situation. They're obviously not able to travel home. They had lost their part-time job, so they needed extra support. But this worked equally well for them so they could continue on their learning journey. And of course, it applied to those TAFEs that have got higher education programs as well. Where do we go to from here? We plan to release this report digitally on Monday, and you'll then be able to see the full report. So I hope you have found that to be useful, and we'll have some opportunity for questions down the track. And at this point, I'd like to welcome, it's going to be, who's going to be speaking first? Is it Peter or Matt?
I'll make the introduction. I just
Peter.
need if I...
All right, okay, thanks, Peter. We'll hand over to you for about 20 minutes, so we've got enough time for questions and answers at the end.
Not a problem. I just want to share my screen, but it says the host has disabled screen sharing. So, Linda, is there any chance I can get access to screen sharing?
Yeah, we're doing that now for you. Yeah, you should have that now.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. I trust you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Now you've got two extroverts talking with 20 minutes, so we will do our best. So make sure we stay on time. So look, for those that don't know me, I'm Peter Nicolatatis, came out of higher education, having spent almost 15 years as a chief information officer across 15 universities, and more recently chaired the digital skills special interest group with the AIIA, which had a very strong connection with the TAFE sector. Of course, a short stint in Optus before joining Technology One, and in the role and capacity of an industry general manager in education, responsible for helping set strategy and ensuring that our product aligns with the needs and expectations of our customers. I'll just get Matt to introduce himself quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and look, thanks, Craig, for the update before and the insights into your surveys. It's really interesting. We obviously work across both universities and TAFEs and K-12. There's so much similarities. I think to Grant's point before in the chat, with chaos and challenges comes opportunity, and I really do think the majority of the sector, from a digital transformation point of view, has been forced to take some leaps and bounds, and we definitely need to keep that momentum going. So thank you for that. Look, I've been with Tech One for 12 years, very much from the R&D side, but predominantly higher ed and TAFEs. I've seen and built the solution that we support over the years, and the challenges that we've faced. So I'm very keen for us today to present where we're at with the sector, what we're seeing, what we're finding. I'll focus more on just the general stuff and update, but Peter will talk more about the student engagement and really the experience that we've been focusing on our solutions and our support of the sector as well. So, okay, so look, before I move over to Peter, I just wanted to touch base on where we're at. Obviously, for those of you who don't know, we're very much a dominant solution used in the Australian TAFE market. We've got 65% of the TAFEs rely on Tech One software. And when I say Tech One software, I'm not just talk about the products and student management, financial, supply chain, etc., HRP. We've taken a further leap. Probably about 7-8 years ago, we worked very closely with AWS, and we took, people refer to it as cloud, but we took our solution to what we call a software as a service. And we've been in front of this group a number of times talking about that. But there's one sector that has moved and probably benefited more than anyone, is the education sector. And when I say that, I talk universities, TAFEs, and schools. We've taken some quite large organisations, Queensland TAFE, 120,000 students, to our SaaS platform. And what has that meant really from a business perspective? I suppose is you could break up a few components. One, what we've found is the ability during COVID, in particular, knowing that Tech One supported all that underlying infrastructure, that scaling, that peak, the performance, the updating of the software from a compliance point of view, the applications themselves. We take all that away now from the education base. We take all those issues and problems from our customers and have that platform 24/7, 365 days. It's secure. I mean, we talk the security at IRAP level, which is Defence, is one of our biggest customers from the government using our student system now. So we've really invested heavily into our platform with our customers. So COVID for us was, we were ready for it. Our customers that were on our SaaS platform were ready for it. And the impact on their business was very minimal as far as that was concerned. And it's not only just our customers, and you guys have thousands of staff that work at different levels, whether teachers, academics, or professional staff, but very much your real customers, which is your students. And that is paramount to our solution and that experience, and making sure that we've got the platform for you guys to have your own, I suppose, branding, for you to continue your ongoing engagement with your students and make sure they're successful. The second thing really, and what it does provide us, it allows us now to provide you with more up-to-date software, quicker to market. It's on our platform. You don't have to be installing it on premise. You don't have to be worrying about that. And you can preview this software much quickly now. And then that's the world we live in. And I take it to your point before, Craig, when we talk about your products are changing, how you offer them. We've seen, and we've seen this for a few years now, but again, whether it's a short course, whether it's a 2-hour course, whether it's a product of you putting a course together of bits and pieces of, all the way to a very detailed research course or high degree research course degrees, the very micro credentials, the ability to be very flexible with your products and what you teach is what our solution needs to support now. So, and that's why we can scale up from from a TAFE short course to some of these more complex courses that are typical of higher ed even. So as we move along into this new world with SaaS and our customer base, the important thing too, very much, we talked about this, I think 12 months ago when we were in Canberra with you guys, is we've done a lot of work with our partners around analytics, around AI, around the information that you receive. Most of our solution contains financial information about your organisation, about your students, about the courses that they're teaching, about what they are doing. A lot of that data is kept on our SaaS platform in large data pools. So we've been working very closely with some of our early adopters and AWS on ensuring that our customers have access to that information real time, and whether that's at the student level, the academic level, teacher level, or more up the executive chain in some of your organisations, to know how you need to be very flexible and change your business model as the requirements of the sector change. So that's really important, and to do that, the software that and the SaaS platform is critical to that, and that's where we see a lot of our investment going into the future. So to Grant's point, to your point, Craig, before, I totally agree with we've got some momentum now. We've got in education, we've probably got 70%, almost 70% of our customers have transitioned from an on-premise to a SaaS platform now, and the ability to move quickly with business now is paramount. So thank you for that. Apart from that, I'm going to pass now on to Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm going to leapfrog straight into the last almost 12 months, and it's ironic. This time 12 months ago, in fact, we were actually at TAFE Queensland hosting our inaugural global mobility program. We brought across several representatives from our UK customer base who want to come and see what does 30 years on in a technology customer base look like in terms of the product's evolution. And COVID hadn't really emerged yet. We were facing other challenges trying to navigate bushfires at the time. And if we fast forward, of course, shortly after the GMP1 program finished, we took a group of people from Australia across to the UK. In fact, we were there in late February, early March, need to cut the program short because I guess events were unfolding very, very quickly. Borders were beginning to close, and there was a real risk of not being able to return quickly back to Australia because of the epidemic. At the time, became obviously a pandemic very, very quickly thereafter. What I've spent the last several months working on with our customers, and one of the things that Matt sort of alluded to, is that we had a responsibility to equally talk and support our customer base, and we did this through our technology, our Together as One campaign. And in that, we actually offered some tools to our customer base more broadly. In particular, we're being asked for a deeper understanding of the analytics that they could use to understand what was going on. As I think you alluded to, Craig, in your report, and no doubt many of the people on this call today have understood that it's easy to have a whole series of markers when you've got a version of students on the campus, using the library, traversing the Wi-Fi, moving around, interacting with other students, combine that with the metrics you get from your structured systems. But when you're completely online, you kind of lose that pastoral care. And so we did a lot of work with some of our customers around a deeper understanding of the analytics that was available, particularly the events that could trigger exception behaviors. For example, people not turning up, late assessments, and generally trying to understand and identify where we could at-risk students. And of course, the other thing you mentioned, I believe, Craig, is you talked a little bit about upskilling, and we found that was a huge opportunity in this period, that we made many of our modules of understanding how to optimize your investment in the systems better. We made those training modules available. It had an enormous take-up. When I fast forward now to December and look back and try to categorize some of the impacts on education. And I think, and I've seen a draft copy of the report you've alluded to, and there are some absolutely fascinating insights into that actually. And hopefully there's some parallels in our observations more generally globally with our customers that, you know, there's obviously a huge narrative at the moment around student and staff well-being. And that isolation has absolutely, for some students, you know, being able, or staff being able to work from home in that flexible working environment has been quite beneficial. It's more time with your family, etc. But on the downside, of course, is that not being able to control that flexibility. It's nice to be able to have that ability to work from home or work from the office as required, but being controlled in terms of certain states that were locked down because of the pandemic. Others aren't able to go and visit friends, or you know, so the social side became quite closed. And we saw that exceptionally highly with our international students, the ones that did actually stay and weren't caught up in the international border related issues. But what we have seen, of course, is certainly a rise in wellbeing and mental health issues. And we are absolutely aware of these. Many of our customers are talking to these issues, and they're looking at ways to capture insights into early identification of at risk. Now, of course, the staff that had to move very quickly, I mean, we've been in a hybrid learning environment for many years now, but being able to shift very quickly from an on-premise environment to really a digital environment, literally overnight, does come with some challenges. And while many of the programs could rapidly be moved online, I think you made a good point that, you know, bringing theory forward came at a cost of deferring the practical side. Then you have the risk of the disconnect between theory and practical learning, which is a very important part of the, I guess, the TAFE underlying programs. So that sort of became a really interesting insight. The other, of course, is it's great to be at home, but we weren't really designed, we didn't have our houses or homes designed to have everybody working from home, everybody connected in a space that was quite often competition for devices, competition for Wi-Fi, competition for quietness, so you can able to operate. And I've got a family of 4 here, all of us, a Year 12 student, a university medical student, a high school music teacher, and myself, all working and operating from home, all competing for space, all competing for quietness so we can get on with our world. And that's in environments where we have that access and that ability to have the right devices and the right access. Many of our customers also pointed out that their students weren't always able to have that access to devices or that connectivity, particularly in some of the regional and remote areas where it became a lot more of an issue. And of course, in the learning experience side of it, and I'm pretty sure I picked up this term from a report earlier in the year, but I believe I've seen this in your report too, ISO learning. This became a new way of considering how we were learning, and that meant an adaptation to our traditional learning methods. I think you made an observation in your narrative around, is this the new normal? And one thing that I think we all can probably feel reasonably comfortable is that how we did things in the past and how we're likely to do it once the dust settles and we return to some level of normality, will be that our processes will have to change. People have become accustomed to a different way of doing things over the last probably 12 months now, or 11 months. And therefore, we need to move into an environment that picks up the best things from the previous years of experience, but also is able to adapt readily to the changes that are necessary. The one thing that does stick out, and I've been on several international calls lately, student and staff well-being, while we are discussing it now in its early days, we're likely to see the impacts of people's concerns and issues manifest themselves more broadly in the years to come. So we need to be mindful of that. And as we do return to whatever normal looks like in the future, that we make sure we look for those pastoral indicators to help identify and support and implement appropriate intervention strategies for at-risk students. We did a survey recently in the UK, specifically looking at this, and what we discovered is a lot of students were starting to when asked the question in the surveys, and it'd be great to compare survey data and not that anonymous data, of course, just to look at where we've got correlation between our findings. A lot of them identified themselves as their health not being particularly great. And part of it was that isolation meant that they weren't able to get about their normal day-to-day, that social connection, that, that campus experience, that, meeting your friends. And campuses, that we know today, are as much about education as social connection, as well-being, as, come together, those extracurricular activities, clubs and societies, all those things make that experience of education and growing really important. And particularly when you mentioned international students, a lot of them that come to Australia come from that cultural insights, because it's very different from their country. One of the observations we did find is that with more people online, that the demand for counsellors became an issue. And while many of our institutions offer these services, they offer them both face-to-face and online, and suddenly the demand was completely online. There was an indication that counsellors were at times hard to get access to. One of the observations we asked about, when you did ask for a face-to-face or asked specifically about where you asked about your well-being, around 1/3 of students indicated that it had a one-on-one conversation. So that pastoral care is absolutely quite rich out there as well. And perhaps the way we may have asked the question might have been alluded to just 1/3, but we believe that answer could have been, or that response may have been a little bit higher had we asked that question a little bit more broadly. But it's really important that we've identified this, and I think you've identified this as an issue in your report as well, that this is something that's going to impact students for some time now, and we need to absolutely be aware of how we manage that. And whether it's systems, it's people, it's processes, it's the combination of all that brings together, I think, a better insight into managing at risk. And it's obviously not just students, it's also our staff that were equally as impacted. So this, and sort of mindful of time as well, we've seen a massive disruption across education. And this has had not only profound impacts around student staff wellbeing, as I've alluded to, but it's also had implications on things like employability. For example, many of the international students that come for that cultural experience also work part-time, as do many of our students normally. And of course, in many of our states, the ability to work part-time, particularly in the hospitality or services-related industries, was effectively shut down because of COVID. And so, not having sort of access to funding or a source of income puts a profound impact on people's comfort. In other words, being able to do things that they want to do in this period. As Matt alluded to, massive demand for understanding the role of digital technology. I mean, the term's used quite loosely, and it means different things to different people. And in some ways, maybe we've redefined the word digital to be making sure that our technology is designed to, in some ways, personalize the experience, but also provide that richness of what you can replace through a face-to-face, where you can provide a digital experience that emulates as best as possible a face-to-face experience, because that hybrid learning, at least for the last 11 months, has been largely digital or online. And also in Australia, of course, in the UK, there were ebbs and flows in this space. That the campuses were shut down, then they were reopened, they'll shut down again, then reopened again. And in fact, borders weren't really ever closed, so students were transversing from Europe and Asia backwards and forwards. And of course, that has caused a whole bunch of other issues in the UK development that I'm sure everyone's aware of. But in Australia, of course, the controls that were put in place, or the processes that were put in place, certainly made the demand for digital technologies a lot higher. And it's not only about designing the right systems, but it's also ensuring that those systems, or access to those systems, are available to as many people as possible. I know, for example, the University of Edinburgh, which I've done some work with recently, struggled with that as an issue, and ended up, as part of their process, providing students that were from lower socioeconomic areas devices so they could connect back to the institution. So the learning experience, of course, will be different. And so safeguarding measures that need to be put in place for students and staff are going to be really important. And I think that's one thing that has come out through this last 11 months, that while we've always focused on identifying at-risk students, we've done it in a sort of instrument aimed at making sure that students could successfully progress through their courses, get that great work, integrated learning experiences, and move on to hopefully being employed in the discipline of learning. Now, of course, we understand that those markers or those indicators are more broad, and we need to understand a lot more about their whole, almost a day in the life of a student and everything that is related to their experience. How do we capture that and make sure we've got measures around exceptions so we can provide the right support, whether it's pastoral or other types of support for those students and staff, of course, at the same time. I think you also mentioned, Craig, that you were very proud of, I think, more broadly, the staff of the TAFE, nationally, and that's absolutely true right across all organisations. And it's not just in sort of tertiary education; it's also in industry. We've seen the resilience of staff at a new level, and people had to adapt very quickly, and they did that, relatively well given the circumstances. I mean, no one could have predicted the impact of COVID, but our ability to adapt and change has proven beyond doubt that, as a country, we're fairly robust in our ability to move fairly quickly. We've obviously seen the issues where it doesn't work as well in other parts of the world. Adapting to change, obviously digital is going to play a key role. Flexibility around assessment, I think, will be a really important goal. I mean, where you have theory and practice sort of disconnected because of events like what's occurring now, then we need to think about rethink or reimagine how assessments could be more effective. Engagement, how do we slowly bring everyone back together where it makes sense? And there was a great comment about, work placements have provided a massive challenge at the moment, because many of the programs that TAFE offer nationally are tied very strongly to work placement programs. And in the last 12 months, that's been obviously a significant issue with students not being able to get those work placements as readily. And I just wanted to sort of finish on a note, before I hand back to the Q&A side of it, that it's not just in Australia. I mean, while we're talking specifically about issues here, there are some great learnings around our colleagues from other parts in the world and how they've been impacted. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the UK in the last 2 years, deep diving into their education frameworks. In the last 12 months, we've seen that turned almost upside down at the moment. And so in some ways, I think Australia can be sort of proud of. It took some of those hard measures in place early on, particularly in states like Victoria with those fairly severe lockdowns. But we're now starting to emerge out in an environment, hopefully, that we've learned how to live with this issue, but have also taken an opportunity over the last several months to redesign and reimagine the way we deliver our courses, our programs, and our care for students and staff. And I think that's a huge advantage. And that's where industry plays a significant role. And as Matt said, that when we're working with our customers, we do that with a view that how do we continue to improve our solutions to make sure we keep up with the demands of what's happening in the environments of our customers. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to hand it back to you, Craig, because I think I wanted to try and work to the time of 11:45, so I think I'm pretty close to time.
Well done. Thanks, Peter and Matt. Really, really appreciate that. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to enter into some Q&A, but I'm going to guide you and I'm going to give some of you some advance notice. The first advance question will be to Joe Pine, who's representing Mary Campbell from TAFE Queensland. And Joe, I'll ask you the question, what was the challenge for you in moving to digital in terms of thinking about meeting compliance requirements, training package requirements and the like? That was question number one. Question number two is I'm going to go to Michelle Hode in a moment to think through that West Australia's had a unique circumstance in being up and about and sort of really social distancing has been finished some time ago, but you do make some observations that despite that, it's still been difficult to get work placement. So I'd be interested in your reflections on that and how you've gone about that. And then for Jenny Dodd from TAFE, who wrote about primarily the success amongst the teachers was the network approach and using everybody's strengths. So they're the first three questions I'm going to ask. And Grant Dray, I'm going to come to you next after that, but there we go. So the first question was to Joe Pine, TAFE Queensland. How did you go about making sure that you could adapt your delivery but sort of still meet all of the legislative requirements?
Look, thanks, Craig. One of the things that we really focused on during that period is record keeping, you know, and really where we did make changes to our delivery, kept quite significant records about the changes that we made and how we were going to manage that. Also, just lots of communication with our staff, interpreting notes from ASQA and just really communicating with people about what the expectations were, what some of the opportunities may have been to do things differently. And really, you know, most of our staff have got really, you know, strong, effective training and assessment strategies. They understand the rules around ASQA. And I think the result of a lot of good work over, you know, the last, since 2014 by the executive at TAFE Queensland, really good understanding of what the limits are, really stood us in good stead during that process.
Fantastic, thanks, Joe. And are you coming to us? You're coming to us from Brisbane rather than sunny Cairns, I assume. There you go. Yeah. One of the benefits of the connected network family. Going to the other side of the country, we welcome Michelle Hode, the General Manager for North Metro TAFE. And as I said, they've had sort of business as normal for quite a while, far longer than Victoria has had. And so just interested in what's that meant in terms of getting back to work-based training and work placements and the like, Michelle. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, as you said, we've had, you know, a relatively kind of free environment. And it was interesting, I guess, you know, not all areas rushed back quickly, even though they could. Others were desperate to. The impact on placements, though, didn't lessen up that much, particularly in the health areas. The rest of it, I think, has been okay, particularly because of all of the infrastructure stimulus. So I think that broadly, kind of construction and manufacturing work placements absolutely opened up very, very fast and barely shut, in fact, because so many operations were continuing to be available. But in the health place, that pressure is huge. And certainly, you know, competition with the universities is very, very strong. And I think that what it was really about was that, you know, all of the health services and aged care services were just so worried about the vulnerability of their patients and their ongoing risk, as well as risk to students. And so effectively, those placements were closed down and they've come back, but we've now got, you know, the bottleneck of trying to catch up, as well as quite understandably, but there's additional pressure put on by the fact that many of our fee-free skill sets and lower fees courses are in the health area. So we've got increased demand at the same time as a backlog, at the same time as our kind of usual enrolments. So across universities and TAFE sectors, there's huge pressure in that area. And we're trying to work with the health services to actually see if we can come up with some more innovative solutions.
Thank you. I think if you could see the noddings around the screens when you mentioned allied health services, et cetera, in terms of the real challenge that's going to present really right across the TAFE network going forward. On my way to asking Jenny Dodd the next question, it was a question to Grant. You made a bit of a comment about what could the future potentially look like. I'd just be interested in your views on that, or the opportunities that are presented to TAFEs having gone through this experience, what do we think the future can hold? And then I'm going to go to Andrew Williamson to talk a little bit about what's been the impact on your programs for international students. And I might also ask you about some of the global connections you participated in the advantages of being locked down, particularly to Technica. So there you go. So Jenny Dodd, the question for you was, you wrote about your success was really based upon staff coming together in different ways using different strengths. So just wonder if you might be able to expand on that for us, please.
Thank you. Yes, certainly, Craig. I think we saw early on a lot of teams working in a way that they hadn't worked before. So I remember the construction team really understanding that the strengths of different team members required them to work in different ways. So some of them might have really focused on doing the facilitation. Others were actually, because they were very far behind, focused on getting materials into the learning management system. They realised how they could work as a team. And that worked extremely well in our, relative to Victoria in particular, very short lockdown, although our people think it was a very long time, but it was a relatively short time compared to Victoria. And that worked really well. What we've seen subsequent to that, though, is that take hold in some teams, but definitely not in all teams. And there's been a few teams pulling back now to old ways of wanting to operate quite autonomously. And I guess the big challenge here, and it's one for Grant, is how do we make sure that we embed some of that going forward? Because it's that efficiency and effectiveness of using different skill sets that I think make the online environment and make the remote learning environment work best, without everybody just trying to replicate what they do as an individual into this different environment.
Thanks, Jenny. And on that note, we want to thank you, as all of the TAFE network here, for the fantastic work you've done in TAFE. Clearly built off a legacy in TAFE Queensland and CIT. And I look forward to seeing you when you're back up here in Canberra with children and grandchildren. So look forward to seeing what the next stage of your life entails. And now I did this serendipitously, by the way, it wasn't planned, but I now do hand the baton over to Jenny's successor, Grant Dreyer, in terms of what's your reflections about what are the opportunities going forward?
Thanks, Craig, and you won't be able to convince me that wasn't deliberate. But anyway, I agree wholeheartedly with Jenny. Any gains we've had haven't stuck consistently across the TAFE division of the university. But what we've decided to do, the learnings we've had are COVID informed, but also informed by VU's block model, where in our higher education space, we basically have a formula that we deliver our higher education products in. And we have at the moment a project running with a slice of teachers from the TAFE division, looking at what our post-COVID delivery method's going to look like, and how. And every course will, and I think everyone's doing this, every course will have a component of online delivery, and every course will have a component of on-campus delivery. We have got some teachers saying to us, we don't need to come on campus to deliver anymore. We can deliver 100% online. And there might be some exceptions, but as an old TAFE, I feel that there's value in the on-campus component, and we would want most of our courses to have an on-campus component. But I think, Craig, the big learning for our staff has been that they don't need to fear computers and they don't need to fear technology, and that it shouldn't mean a loss of jobs. It should mean a better service and a better outcome for our students, and easier access for people to come and train with us. And as we look at retraining the workforce for a post-COVID world, there will be a lot of people who won't have time to sit on campus 4 days a week to upskill and reskill. So I think those learnings we've got will position the sector really well across the country to be more responsive to the needs of our clients.
Good on you, thanks, Grant. And I'll have that Hawthorn football jumper on the way to you so you can wear that proudly when you're in Hobart. So let's see how that goes for you. We're now going to ask the question of Andrew Williamson. And if there's anybody else who'd like to ask a question or make a comment, just put your microphone on live and I'll know. So, Andrew.
G'day, Craig, and hello, everyone. Yeah, so I've started at Homesglen this year and with the international student portfolio, amongst others, quite a year for that. We were obviously, as all of you were who have international students, concerned for their well-being as well as their educational continuity. Someone said earlier that the international students, part of what they want is the experience of being on campus and being with other students and local students, and obviously that was really shut down here in Melbourne. We did build online communities for our international students. We did it in multiple languages just to make sure that health advice and so forth was coming through and that we could keep people connected. We moved out a whole lot of computers that we had at our disposal, and when we ran out of those, staff brought in their old computers and our IT department re-imaged them, and we gave them to students to keep in their homes or in their accommodation, so that they could still engage with the institute and the learning programs. We had a massive program of food being distributed and created and shipped out to people, wellbeing packs and so forth. So it was quite an effort, and something that I think we were quite proud of, and a lot of the staff were involved in that, donations of food and so forth. So that was very good. What we did see in an unexpected way, I guess, but probably makes sense, is that we saw an increase in our international offshore programs. We had lots of people from around the world actually asking us whether we could deliver remotely to them, and we did. So it's one of the only areas in our TAFE where we've got a big green line across the budget for this year. Otherwise, it's obviously been a pretty hard year. The other thing you asked about, Craig, was about the link with Technica, and I am one of probably a number of people on this call who were disappointed to not be having Pinsos in San Sebastian about 6 weeks ago, but we were going to be there for the World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics World Congress, and as a co-chair of the Applied Research and Innovation Affinity Group, we were planning to really have a big congress there. Because we didn't get that, obviously, face-to-face, in some ways the world's become smaller, and so we now there are 3 chairs of this of the affinity group. One's in Technica, one's in Camerson College in Canada, and obviously me in Australia. And we've been meeting, a whole host of people from around the world have been meeting in one of the 3 time zones. So sometimes it's your turn to meet up at 2 in the morning, and sometimes you get through in the afternoon. But it's been a really interesting conversation emerging around applied research and innovation, and obviously we're using these sorts of technologies to come closer.
Fantastic, thanks, Andrew. I don't think there's anybody else that's put their hand up, and we're coming close to midday. I can, in the context of San Sebastian, I can assure you that in 2022, San Sebastian and Technica is ready to welcome everybody from around the world. We're still waiting for the exact timing, but we do expect it to be September, October, that time of year. And I encourage everybody to plan for that, because they've got a great vocational learning model that they apply, and it'll be great to learn from them. Thank you very much for participating. We've had about 45 people engaged, CEOs as well as senior leaders from the TAFE network. Thank you to Technology One as our corporate partners. We trust that we can continue to work together, because we're all moving into some form of digital world in some particular way. If you've got feedback, very happy to receive feedback via email, etc., through member services. We're at the process of organising or planning for next year a series of these webinars around topics that are current for next year, as we think about this year being a springboard into next. So we do hope that you can participate in those, particularly as we beam in some speakers from overseas and the like. So as we come to the end of this year, we thank you for your engagement, for all your hard work. we can certainly come to the end of this year and say that this has been a year like no other. Let's hope next year is not like a year before, but is a brand new year with brand new opportunities for the TAFE network across Australia. And on that note, I thank you very much for your participation. And if I don't see you or talk to you before Christmas, all the best for the Christmas season and all the best for a strong 2021. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.